Rain pressed against the windows of the sea-glass diner, the kind of steady drizzle that made the world feel suspended. Daniel Hale sat in his usual booth, hands wrapped around a chipped mug that had long gone cold. The waitress moved quietly between tables, her voice barely above the hum of the jukebox. Something about her tone made his chest tighten. It wasn't her words, but the rhythm, the pause before each sentence. When she said his name, it trembled like a memory he wasn't ready to touch. He looked up, met her sea-green eyes, and for one heartbeat, saw his late wife's face flicker through hers. Outside, thunder rolled over the ocean, and a light bulb above them flickered. Somewhere in the storm, a faint voice whispered, soft, familiar, and gone before he could tell if it was real. What would you do if grief spoke back to you? Morning breaks gray and thin. Daniel stands on the pier with a thermos of stale coffee, staring at the endless horizon. The town behind him stirs awake. The clatter of gulls, the hum of boats. He closes his eyes and hears her again. Not Emily, but Lena. Her laughter echoing faintly, cruelly. He opens his eyes, and the diner sign flickers across the street, pulling him back to where this haunting began. Back inside the diner, Daniel sits again. Same booth, same cup, same ghost in his chest. Emily brings his order without asking, their silence a language of its own. A radio murmurs softly from the counter, the announcer's voice low, nostalgic. Then, a familiar sound leaks through, a few seconds of static, and a woman's voice that freezes Daniel's hand midair. It's Lena. He looks up sharply, but Emily has already turned away. That night, Daniel drives home with the sound of rain, and that familiar voice replaying in his mind. He finds the old phone, the one he hasn't turned on since Lena died. The battery blinks red. When it powers up, there it is. Her last recording, time-stamped the day before she drowned. His hand hovers over play. Outside, lightning flashes, as if the world itself warns him not to press it. He presses play. Lena's voice fills the room. Warm, steady, and unbearably alive. She speaks of the sea, of something she wanted to tell him when she came home. Then, faintly, beneath her words, another voice. Young, female, scared. Daniel's heart slams against his ribs. He knows that voice now. It's Emily's, and she was there. Daniel sat motionless long after the recording ended. The sound of his own heart beat louder than the rain against the windows. He replayed the message again and again, counting every breath, every syllable. There was no doubt. Emily's voice was there, pleading, distant, terrified. He needed to know why. He needed to know what she was doing with his wife in those final moments. The phone slipped from his grasp and hit the floor with a soft crack. Outside, the storm deepened, and in its rhythm, he thought he heard Lena calling his name. By morning, the storm had passed, but its ghost lingered over the sea. Daniel drove toward the diner, every passing streetlight flicking across his face like a countdown. The world outside his windshield was washed in silver, quiet, and heavy with unspoken truth. He rehearsed what he'd say, how he'd ask, how she'd react. But no version sounded sane. When he finally saw the sea glass sign ahead, his chest tightened. He wasn't sure if he wanted answers or forgiveness. He entered the diner with a calmness that felt forced. Emily looked up from behind the counter, her hand pausing mid-wipe, as if she had been expecting him. "Coffee?" she asked softly. Daniel's voice broke as he replied, "You were there." The sound of a plate breaking in the kitchen punctuated the silence that followed. Emily didn't deny it. She only lowered her eyes, whispered something he couldn't catch, and turned away, her breath trembling like wind against glass. Emily followed him outside when he left, the doorbell chiming behind her. The air smelled of wet pavement and salt. "It wasn't what you think," she said, her voice shaking. Daniel turned, pain carved deep into his expression. "Then tell me what it was," he demanded. Her lips trembled, but no words came, only tears mixing with the mist. For a moment their griefs collided, raw and wordless, before she whispered, "I tried to save her." Then she was gone, swallowed by fog. That night, Daniel sat at his desk surrounded by papers, photos, and grief. He opened Lena's phone records, searching for any clue. Then he found it, a call log from the diner's landline, minutes before the accident. His hands shook as he traced the number. He stared at Emily's name written in the staff list. Mara had pinned to the wall the week before. The truth was spreading like ink through water. Someone had to have known. The next morning, Daniel returned to the diner before sunrise. The world was quiet, the streets slick from another night of rain. Emily was already there, wiping down the counter as if nothing had happened. When she saw him, her hands froze and the rags slipped from her grasp. "Why was your voice on that recording?" he asked softly. His voice cracked from sleepless hours. She met his eyes, and for the first time he saw real fear. Not of him, but of what she remembered. "Because I was there when she died," she whispered. The sound of the jukebox clicked on, playing a song that made them both look away. Emily led him outside. Her steps hurried, her breath shallow. They stood by the dumpster behind the diner, the air heavy with salt and damp cardboard. "She came here that night," Emily began. "She said she needed to talk to someone." "I didn't know she was your wife until after." Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears. "Talk about what?" he asked. Emily looked away toward the ocean, eyes glistening. "About something she'd done. Something she couldn't forgive herself for." Daniel's world tilted. Lena had always seemed untouchable, gentle, sure, full of light. What could she have done that needed confession? Emily reached into her pocket, pulling out a small silver necklace. "She left this on the table when she ran out," she said softly. Daniel recognized it instantly. Lena's locket, the one that had gone missing after her death. He took it in shaking hands, his reflection warping in its tiny mirror. "You're lying," he said, voice breaking. But the locket was real. The past had found its way back. Inside, Mara Jensen broke the silence as she stepped out of the kitchen. "You two need to stop whispering like ghosts," she said sharply, drying her hands on a towel. Daniel turned toward her, eyes fierce. "Did you know Lena?" he asked. Mara's voice softened. "Everyone knew her, but not like you think." Emily stiffened, her face pale as chalk. Mara glanced between them, the truth heavy on her tongue, but she said nothing more. The air thickened with what none of them wanted to say. That evening, Daniel returned home with the locket heavy in his palm. He opened it, expecting a photo of them together, but instead found a folded piece of paper inside, stained by sea salt. It was Lena's handwriting. 4 words, only. I couldn't keep quiet. The wind outside rose like a whisper, rattling the windows. Somewhere in the distance, the sea answered back. Daniel sank into his chair, tears burning his eyes, realizing that truth didn't just hurt. It demanded to be found. Daniel didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lena's face and heard Emily's trembling voice saying, "I tried to save her." By dawn, he was back at the diner. The sun cut through the fog in weak, fractured beams. Emily was there, sweeping the floor, eyes hollow from tears. He dropped the locket on the counter between them. "You said she came to talk," he whispered. "Talk about what?" Emily froze, her knuckles white on the broom handle. "She wanted to tell the truth," she said softly, "but not the one you think." Emily finally sat, her shoulders slumped, hands trembling in her lap. "She didn't drown because of me," she began, voice shaking. "She drowned because she was afraid of what she'd done." Daniel leaned forward, his heart racing. "And what did she do?" The words came out broken. Emily met his eyes, tears glistening. "She thought she'd caused someone's death. A man who worked the lighthouse." but it was an accident. She came to me that night because I was the one who found him. Daniel's breath caught. You? The air turned heavy with the sound of the waves outside. Daniel stared at her, memories unraveling like thread. You were there that night, he said, voice barely audible. Emily nodded. She was crying. She said she couldn't live with it anymore. I tried to stop her, Daniel. I swear I tried. Her voice cracked, raw with guilt. She ran into the storm before I could reach her. Daniel's world went silent except for the echo of those words. The truth was colder than the sea itself. Mara entered again, her presence sharp as a bell. You shouldn't have told him, she hissed at Emily. It wasn't your story to tell. Daniel turned, fury and confusion fighting in his eyes. You knew? Mara's silence was an answer in itself. Your wife wasn't supposed to be out there that night, she said finally. But she went anyway, to protect someone else. Daniel's stomach dropped. Protect who? Mara looked at Emily, and for a moment the whole room seemed to stop breathing. That night, Daniel drove to the cliffs where Lena had fallen. The sea roared below, black and merciless. He played the recording again, this time letting it run to the very end. Lena's voice whispered something he hadn't noticed before. A name. Emily's. And then another. Dad. Daniel froze. A cold wind swept through the rocks. And in that moment, he realized Emily hadn't just been a witness. She was connected to all of it in ways he had never imagined. Us. The night swallowed Daniel's breath as he replayed Lena's recording for the 10th time. The storm's howl, the rushing waves, the panic in her voice. Then Emily's cry, faint but unmistakable, calling for help. But it was the third voice that broke him. A man's, rough and older. Emily, get back! It shouted before the sound cut out. Daniel gripped the phone until his knuckles turned white. That name she'd said, Dad. The word echoed in his head. Emily Rowan's father was a detective, and now Daniel knew the lie had only just begun to unravel. Daniel drove straight to the Rowan house, headlights slicing through the mist. Emily answered the door in silence, eyes rimmed red, wearing a faded sweater that looked borrowed. Behind her, an older man stepped into view, Detective Rowan. His face was all sharp lines and gray shadows. You shouldn't be here, he said coldly. Daniel met his gaze. You were there the night my wife died. For a moment, no one moved. Then Emily whispered, Dad, please. Inside the small living room, the truth began to surface like wreckage. Detective Rowan admitted what Emily couldn't. Lena had come to him that night, desperate to clear her conscience. She had found out that her husband's architectural firm, the one Daniel ran, was behind the lighthouse collapse that killed a worker. Daniel staggered back, his world spinning. She wanted to tell me, he whispered. The detective nodded grimly. She never got the chance. Emily covered her mouth, sobbing quietly. She thought you'd hate her for knowing. Daniel sank onto the edge of the couch, head in his hands. She was trying to protect me from my own mistakes, he whispered. The detective nodded slowly. She came to Emily because she found my badge in the debris. She realized Emily was my daughter. She thought if she told her, it might reach me. Emily's hands shook. But it didn't, she slipped Daniel. I couldn't reach her in time. Her voice cracked under the weight of memory. The room was silent, except for the faint, rhythmic crash of waves outside. Daniel left the house just before dawn, the sky streaked in bruised purples and gold. He walked along the shore where Lena's body had been found, the waves whispering her name. He held the locket tightly in one hand and the phone in the other. For the first time, he understood. Lena hadn't been keeping secrets from him. She'd been trying to make things right. He looked toward the lighthouse ruins, the beam long dead, and whispered, I forgive you. The sea took the words like a promise. The sky turned black by afternoon. Waves hammered the coast, and the air grew thick with electricity. Daniel stood at the edge of town, watching the ocean twist and swell. The storm had returned, violent, unrelenting, as if the sea itself demanded to finish what it started. At the diner, Emily struggled to secure the shutters, while thunder rattled the windows. When Daniel burst through the door, soaked and pale, she knew what he'd come to say. "We can't keep living in ghosts," he said. But the storm outside wasn't the only one ready to break. The wind howled through every crack, and the diner shook like a memory refusing to stay buried. Emily shouted over the noise, "You should leave." But Daniel didn't move. "Not until I understand why you stayed quiet," he said. Emily turned toward him, her face streaked with rain and fear. "Because I thought you'd hate me," she said. "Because I thought if you knew the truth you'd never see me as anything but the girl who couldn't save her." A crash of thunder split the moment, and the lights went out. A sudden crash shattered the window near the door, spraying glass across the floor. Daniel grabbed Emily's arm and pulled her back. Rain and wind tore through the diner, howling like the dead. In the chaos, he shouted, "She wouldn't want this guilt to bury you." Emily fell to her knees, clutching the counter edge. "I see her every night," she cried. "In the tide, in my dreams, in the look you give me." Her voice cracked as the lightning flashed, painting her face in white fire. Daniel knelt beside her, their grief colliding like thunder and sea. A car engine roared outside. The diner door burst open, and Detective Rowan staggered in, drenched and furious. "Emily," he barked, slamming the door shut behind him. "You shouldn't be here." His eyes flicked to Daniel, then to the broken window. "You told him," he said darkly. Emily stood tall, trembling but resolute. "He deserved to know," she replied. The detective's expression cracked, rage giving way to grief. "I lost one woman to that storm," he said, voice trembling. "I won't lose another." Lightning struck the lighthouse ruins across the bay, sending a white flare into the dark sky. The three of them stood frozen, the flash illuminating faces carved by fear and truth. The storm outside was peaking, but something inside them had finally begun to break open. Daniel turned to Emily and said, "It wasn't your fault." Her tears mixed with rain as her father wrapped an arm around her. The diner lights flickered back to life, casting the first warmth they'd seen in hours. For the first time, the storm sounded like forgiveness. The morning after the storm, the world seemed to exhale. The sky was a pale silver wash, the sea calm and endless. Daniel walked along the soaked sand toward the lighthouse ruins, the sound of gulls breaking the silence. Emily followed a few steps behind, clutching Lena's locket in her hand. The air smelled of salt and ash. "She wanted us to find peace," Daniel said softly. Emily nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Then let's give her that?" Together, they climbed the worn steps that led to what remained of the light. Inside the crumbling lighthouse, sunlight filtered through shattered windows, painting the floor in golden shards. Daniel placed his hand on the rusted railing, tracing the marks of time and memory. Emily stood near the lantern room, staring out at the vast blue horizon. "She was standing here," Emily said, her voice trembling, "right before she fell." Daniel turned, eyes softening. "Then this is where she finally needs to rest." He took the locket from her hand and held it tight. They stood in silence as the wind moved through the open tower, whispering like a familiar song. Daniel opened the locket one last time, looking at Lena's smile, then at Emily, whose face carried echoes of both pain and hope. "She saved us, didn't she?" Emily said quietly. Daniel nodded. "She always did." Together they set the locket on the windowsill, the morning light striking it until it shone like a tiny sun. The sea below sparkled, alive again. Detective Rowan joined them just before noon, climbing the worn steps in silence. He stopped at the doorway, watching his daughter and the man she had helped heal. "She'd be proud of you," he said softly. Emily turned and smiled for the first time in days, a small, fragile curve of the lips. Daniel extended his hand toward the detective. "Thank you," he said simply. For a moment, the three stood there, strangers bound by tragedy and truth, looking out at the sea that had once taken everything and now gave them back a piece of peace. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel returned alone. He stood before the lighthouse one final time, listening to the rhythm of the waves. In the fading light, the locket gleamed softly where he and Emily had left it. He could almost hear Lena's laughter carried in the wind, blending with the sea's whisper. "You kept your promise," he murmured. Then, as the first star appeared, he turned toward the town lights, a small smile forming through tears. The past was still there, but it no longer hurt to remember.